Alright, let's talk about the start of this whole crazy ordeal. Picture this, me, Sarah, fresh off the moving truck, boxes stacked to the ceiling, and a desperate need for a shower. I'd finally bought my own place. A cute little two-bedroom in what seemed like the perfect, quiet neighborhood. Of course, it was an HOA, but how bad could it be, right? I was determined to fit in. I envisioned myself becoming a model resident, meticulously following every rule, waving cheerfully at my neighbors, and maybe even joining the gardening club. I even practiced my "hello, I'm Sarah, so nice to meet you" smile in the mirror. The neighborhood itself was pretty cookie-cutter. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a general air of, well, let's just say everyone seemed to be trying a little too hard. I told myself it was just suburban charm. I told myself I could handle it. Little did I know I was about to meet Mrs. Kravitz, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, and my life was about to become a reality show I never auditioned for. And wouldn't you know it, Mrs. Kravitz made her grand entrance almost immediately. The day after I moved in, while I was still wrestling with unpacking boxes labeled kitchen utensils, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman with a perfectly coiffed gray bob, a floral dress that screamed country club, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," she chirped, holding out a pie. "I'm Mrs. Kravitz, your neighbor from across the street. I thought you might appreciate a little something to make you feel at home." I thanked her profusely, genuinely touched by the gesture. The pie, however, looked suspicious. The crust was a uniform shade of beige, and the filling seemed to be jiggling a bit too much. Still, I invited her in, and we made small talk about the weather, the HOA rules, which she seemed intimately familiar with, and the importance of keeping up appearances. As she left, she squeezed my hand a little too tightly and said, "We're so glad to have you, dear. Just remember, we all have to do our part to keep this neighborhood beautiful." The pie, by the way, tasted vaguely of cardboard and disappointment. Fast forward a few weeks. I'd finally managed to unpack most of the boxes and was starting to feel like I was actually settling in. My fridge, however, was looking tragically bare. So, I decided to brave the weekend grocery store crowds. I'm talking big shopping trip. I'm a vegetarian, so I stocked up on all the essentials. Organic avocados, the good kind with the small pit scar, almond milk, specifically the unsweetened vanilla variety, a mountain of fresh vegetables, and, because I'm a sucker for them, gluten-free crackers. I also grabbed a few treats for myself, some dark chocolate sea salt caramels, and a bottle of my favorite kombucha. You know, the essentials. The checkout line was a nightmare, but I finally managed to wrangle all the bags into my cart and haul them out to my car. Little did I know, the seemingly innocent grocery trip was about to turn into a full-blown neighborhood scandal, all thanks to Mrs. Kravitz and her unique interpretation of property ownership. The drive home was uneventful, thankfully. I pulled into my driveway, relieved to be back and ready to tackle the mountain of groceries. I popped the trunk and immediately regretted my life choices. Seriously, how did I buy so much stuff? Bag after bag, I started hauling them out, struggling under the weight. My arms were burning, my back was aching, and I was pretty sure I was developing a permanent grocery bag-shaped indentation on my shoulder. Just as I was juggling 3 bags filled with what felt like solid lead, probably just the avocados, I heard a voice. Well, what do we have here?" I turned to see Mrs. Kravitz standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, a distinctly disapproving look on her face. This couldn't be good. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and Mrs. Kravitz was about to turn my afternoon into a suburban nightmare. I braced myself. The unloading scene was about to become a showdown. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Kravitz?" I asked, trying to keep my tone polite even though my arms were screaming in protest. She huffed. "Well, for starters, your car is parked a good 6 inches over the line. Honestly, some people have no consideration for their neighbors." I glanced down. She was right. I was a little over the line. But 6 inches? Really? "I'm sorry," I said, shifting the bags in my arms. "I'll move it as soon as I get these groceries inside." "And all this commotion," she continued, completely ignoring my apology. "It's a Saturday afternoon. Some of us are trying to enjoy the peace and quiet." I bit back a sarcastic remark about the symphony of lawnmowers that usually filled the air on Saturdays. "I'm just unloading groceries," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It won't take long." That's when things took a turn for the truly bizarre. Mrs. Kravitz narrowed her eyes, pointed a finger at one of the grocery bags, and said, "Those look awfully familiar." "Familiar?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "What do you mean, familiar? I just bought these at the store." "Yes, well," Mrs. Kravitz said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "I had a grocery delivery scheduled for today. And those bags, They look remarkably like what I ordered. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Are you saying you think these are your groceries? It's certainly a possibility, she said, nodding slowly. I ordered organic avocados, almond milk, things like that. It wouldn't surprise me if the delivery driver got the addresses mixed up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mrs. Kravitz, I assure you, these are my groceries. I paid for them, I have the receipt in my purse. I even remember picking out those avocados myself. Well, she said, crossing her arms again. I'd like to see that receipt. My jaw dropped. Seriously? You think I'm lying about my own groceries? This was officially insane. I was standing in my driveway being accused of stealing groceries by a woman who probably alphabetizes her spice rack. This was not how I envisioned my life in suburbia. Sighing dramatically, I shifted the remaining bags to one arm and rummaged through my purse, finally producing the crumpled receipt. I thrust it at Mrs. Kravitz. Here, I said, trying to control my rising irritation. See for yourself. She snatched the receipt from my hand and peered at it through her bifocals. She said, tapping her chin. It says organic avocados and almond milk, but anyone could have printed this off the internet. I gaped at her. Are you serious? It has the store's logo, the date, the time, everything. Well, she said, her voice rising in volume, I specifically ordered 6 organic avocados and I don't see that quantity listed here. And I get the extra creamy almond milk, not just the regular kind. I couldn't believe this woman. She was actually arguing about the type of almond milk. Mrs. Kravitz, I said, my voice trembling slightly, I don't know what to tell you. These are my groceries. I bought them, I paid for them, and I'm going to put them inside my house now. But she wasn't listening. She was already pulling out her phone. I've had enough of this, she declared. I'm calling the police. My heart sank. Mrs. Kravitz, please, I pleaded, don't do this. This is ridiculous. We can sort this out like adults. But she was already dialing, her voice rising with each word. Yes, hello? I'd like to report a theft. Yes, that's right, my neighbor. She has my groceries. I think she stole them. Or maybe the delivery driver gave them to the wrong house, but she's refusing to give them back. Yes, that's right, she's claiming they're hers. I have reason to believe she's lying. Yes, I'll wait. She hung up, a triumphant smirk on her face. They're on their way, she announced. They'll sort this out. I stood there paralyzed. The police? Over groceries? This was beyond absurd. I glanced around, hoping anyone, would come to my rescue. But the other houses remained silent, their curtains twitching ever so slightly. I was on my own. This was really happening. Mrs. Kravitz had officially lost it, and I was about to be interrogated by the police over a bag of organic avocados. My life had become a sitcom, and I was pretty sure it was about to get canceled. The wait for the police felt like an eternity. Every passing car sent my heart racing. I imagined the headlines, new homeowner arrested for avocado theft. It was mortifying. I tried to salvage the situation by at least getting the groceries inside, but Mrs. Kravitz blocked my path, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on her face. Oh no, you don't, she said. We're leaving everything right here until the police arrive. Evidence, you know. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pulled out my phone and frantically scrolled through my contacts, desperately searching for someone to call. My husband was at work. My parents were out of town. Finally, I landed on my best friend, Emily. I hit dial, praying she'd answer. Hey, Sarah. What's up? Emily's cheerful voice was a welcome sound, even through the phone. Emily, you are not going to believe this, I said, my voice trembling. And then, in a hushed whisper, I recounted the entire ridiculous saga, from the suspicious pie to the impending police arrival. Emily's initial laughter quickly turned to outrage. That crazy woman. I can't believe she called the cops over groceries. I'm coming over there right now. No, don't, I said, panicking. The police are already on their way. I don't want you to get involved. But it was too late. Emily was already halfway out the door. At least I wouldn't be facing the suburban nightmare alone. Just as Emily said she was arriving, a police car pulled up to the curb, its flashing lights reflecting off the perfectly manicured lawns. My stomach churned. This was really happening. 2 officers emerged from the car, looking slightly bewildered. I could practically see the question marks forming above their heads. I'm sure they had imagined dealing with more serious crimes than a grocery dispute in suburbia. Mrs. Kravitz, of course, was in her element. She puffed out her chest and strode towards the officers, ready to launch into her version of events. As she did, I noticed curtains twitching in the neighboring houses. Faces peeked out from behind blinds, eager to witness the drama unfolding on my driveway. The whole neighborhood was watching. Before Mrs. Kravitz could get a word in, Emily screeched to a halt in her beat-up Honda Civic, hopping out with a determined glint in her eyes. "Don't worry, Sarah," she shouted, marching towards me. "I'm here to be your witness." I cringed. This was officially the most embarrassing moment of my entire life. The police were here, Mrs. Kravitz was ready to pounce, and Emily was about to make the situation 10 times worse. Suburban bliss, indeed. The officers, a young woman and an older man, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The young woman, Officer Diaz, seemed vaguely amused, while the older man, Officer Miller, just looked tired. Mrs. Kravitz launched into her dramatic retelling, complete with exaggerated hand gestures and indignant huffs. She painted me as a grocery-stealing menace, a threat to the very fabric of the HOA. "She just pulled up," Mrs. Kravitz said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "With my groceries. I know I ordered organic avocados and almond milk, and those bags are full of them." I tried to reason with her, but she refused to cooperate. "She's probably a professional thief." Officer Diaz raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, are you sure these are your groceries? Do you have any proof?" "Well, no," Mrs. Kravitz admitted. "But I just know it. I can feel it in my bones. Besides, she couldn't even produce a proper receipt. It's probably a forgery." Officer Miller sighed and turned to me. "Ma'am, can you show us some identification and explain your side of the story?" I nodded, relieved to finally have a chance to speak. "Of course," I said, pulling out my driver's license. "This is my house and those are my groceries. I can prove it." I handed Officer Miller my driver's license, pointing out my address, which matched the house we were standing in front of. "And here's the receipt again," I said, offering it to Officer Diaz. "You can see the store, the date, everything. And if you look in the bags, you'll see things that Mrs. Kravitz wouldn't have ordered. I'm a vegetarian, so there's tofu, tempeh, all sorts of things she probably wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole." Emily chimed in, and she's obsessed with organic avocados. She only buys the ones with the little pit scar. It's a weird thing, but I swear it's true. Officer Diaz chuckled. Okay, we get the picture." She rummaged through one of the bags, pulling out a package of tofu. "Yeah, I don't think Mrs. Kravitz is claiming this." Officer Miller, however, still looked skeptical. "All right, ma'am," he said, turning back to me. "If you don't mind, we just need to confirm a few things. Is there anything else that would prove these are your groceries?" I paused, racking my brain. "Well," I said slowly, "there's one thing about the avocados." This was my chance. The avocado test. It was time to prove, once and for all, that these were, in fact, my groceries. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I know this sounds crazy, but I can prove those avocados are mine. I specifically look for the ones with a small scar near the pit. It's a weird quirk, I know, but I can always tell." Officer Miller raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "A scar near the pit?" "Yes," I said, grabbing one of the avocados from the bag. "I need a knife." Emily, ever resourceful, pulled a small pocket knife from her purse. "Here you go." I carefully sliced the avocado open, revealing the pit. And there it was. A tiny, almost imperceptible scar, right where I remembered it being. I held it up for the officers to see. "See?" I said triumphantly. "The scar. I told you." Officer Diaz peered at the avocado, then back at me. "Well, I'll be," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Looks like you're right, ma'am." Officer Miller, still looking slightly bewildered, leaned in for a closer look. Even Mrs. Kravitz craned her neck, her eyes wide with disbelief. The avocado test had worked. I had proven my grocery ownership with a tiny scar on an avocado pit. This was officially the most bizarre victory of my life. Mrs. Kravitz's face went from disbelief to a sort of sickly green. She stammered, "Well, I never. I must be having a senior moment. You know, things aren't always as clear as they used to be. My eyesight isn't what it once was." She fluttered her hands nervously, trying to regain her composure. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said, turning to me with a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I just get so worried about things being out of place in the neighborhood. You understand, don't you? We all have to do our part to keep things shipshape." Officer Diaz exchanged a knowing glance with Officer Miller, who just shook his head wearily. It was clear they weren't buying her act for a second. Emily, never one to let things go, piped up. "So, you're saying you called the cops on my friend because you had a senior moment?" "That's a pretty serious moment, Mrs. Kravitz." Mrs. Kravitz glared at Emily, then quickly turned back to me, forcing another apologetic smile. It was all a misunderstanding, dear. A simple misunderstanding. Please forgive me. I just stared at her, speechless. The audacity of this woman was truly astounding. She had accused me of theft, called the police, and now she was trying to brush it all off as a senior moment. Officer Diaz turned to Mrs. Kravitz, her voice firm but polite. Ma'am, while we appreciate you looking out for your neighborhood, calling the police with such little evidence was not the best course of action. We understand mistakes happen, but please refrain from making accusations without proper proof in the future. We have more important things to deal with. Officer Miller nodded in agreement. Yes, ma'am. We're going to have to ask you not to waste our time like this again. Mrs. Kravitz, thoroughly deflated, mumbled something about just trying to keep the neighborhood safe and retreated back into her house, her perfectly coiffed gray bob bobbing with each step. Officer Diaz turned to me, a genuine smile on her face. Well, ma'am, she said, looks like everything is in order here. Sorry for the inconvenience. Have a good day. Officer Miller just nodded curtly and followed Officer Diaz back to the patrol car. As they drove away, I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood still watching me from behind their curtains. The show was over, but the feeling of humiliation lingered. At least it was finally over. I could finally put my groceries away. And maybe, just maybe, start planning my escape from suburbia. Emily helped me carry the groceries inside, shooting daggers at Mrs. Kravitz's house the entire time. Once we were safely inside, I finally allowed myself to collapse onto the couch, a mixture of anger and exhaustion washing over me. I can't believe that just happened, I said, shaking my head. She actually called the cops. Over groceries. Emily squeezed my shoulder. I know, it's insane. But hey, you handled it like a champ. You even pulled off the avocado test. That was brilliant. I managed a weak smile. Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'll ever look at an avocado the same way again. A few minutes later, there was a hesitant knock at the door. I groaned. Please tell me that's not Mrs. Kravitz again. Emily peeked through the peephole. Nope, it's her. I reluctantly opened the door. Mrs. Kravitz stood there, looking even more pathetic than before. I just wanted to apologize, she mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I really didn't mean to cause any trouble. Her apology sounded about as sincere as a used car salesman's promise. Right, I said flatly. Well, she said, fidgeting with her hands, I should get going. Again, I'm so sorry. And with that, she scurried back to her house. I closed the door and leaned against it, sighing deeply. I was shaken, angry, and utterly disillusioned with my new neighborhood. What had I gotten myself into? The next few days were awkward, to say the least. I avoided Mrs. Kravitz like the plague, and I could feel the curious stares of the other neighbors whenever I stepped outside. I knew they were all talking about the grocery incident. I decided I needed to know if this was a one-time thing or if Mrs. Kravitz was a repeat offender. So, armed with a plate of homemade cookies, a peace offering of sorts, I ventured out to meet some of my other neighbors. My first stop was Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived next door to Mrs. Kravitz. I approached her cautiously, offering the plate of cookies. Hi, Mrs. Peterson, I said, forcing a friendly smile. I'm Sarah, your new neighbor. I just wanted to introduce myself. Mrs. Peterson eyed me warily, then took a cookie. Thank you, dear, she said, her voice raspy. I took a deep breath. I was wondering, have you ever had any difficulties with Mrs. Kravitz? I asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened slightly. She looked around nervously, then leaned in close to me. Oh, honey, she whispered, you have no idea. And boy, did she have a story to tell. Turns out Mrs. Kravitz had a long and storied history of meddling in the affairs of her neighbors. Mrs. Peterson recounted tales of complaints about lawn heights, accusations of improper trash disposal, and even a dispute over the color of someone's mailbox. She's been doing this for years, Mrs. Peterson whispered. Everyone's afraid to cross her. She even tried to get me fined for having a slightly overgrown rosebush. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like living in a real-life version of a sitcom, only much less funny. I visited a few other neighbors, and each one had their own Mrs. Kravitz story to share. Mr. Henderson, who lived across the street, told me about the time Mrs. Kravitz accused him of parking his truck illegally, even though it was perfectly within the lines. Mrs. Davis, down the street, said Mrs. Kravitz had complained about her holiday decorations being too gaudy. They all offered their sympathy and advice. Just try to ignore her, Mrs. Peterson said. It's the only way to stay sane in this neighborhood. Don't let her get to you, Mr. Henderson added. She thrives on attention. I thanked them for their support, feeling a little less alone. At least I knew I wasn't crazy. Mrs. Kravitz was, in fact, a neighborhood menace. Now, the question was, what was I going to do about it? The obvious solution seemed to be reporting Mrs. Kravitz to the HOA. After all, she was clearly violating some kind of neighborly conduct rule. But the thought of escalating the situation filled me with dread. What if she retaliated? What if the HOA sided with her? I could just imagine the endless meetings, the passive-aggressive notes, the constant scrutiny. I considered talking to the HOA president, Mr. Johnson, but I'd heard he was a close friend of Mrs. Kravitz. It seemed like a lost cause. Besides, the neighbors had warned me that involving the HOA would only make things worse. They're useless, Mrs. Peterson had said. They're more afraid of Mrs. Kravitz than anyone else. So I was stuck. I couldn't ignore her completely, but I couldn't risk escalating the situation by reporting her. I needed a plan, a way to subtly push back without starting a full-blown war. And that's when I decided on a little bit of petty revenge. It wasn't the most mature solution, but it was definitely the most appealing. It was time to give Mrs. Kravitz a taste of her own medicine in the most harmless way possible. It had to be subtle. It had to be deniable. And it had to drive her absolutely crazy. My plan was simple: Operation Annoyance. The first step was parking. I made sure to park just a hair over the line near Mrs. Kravitz's house, not enough to actually block her driveway or cause any real inconvenience, but just enough to trigger her obsessive need for order. I checked my rearview mirror, a mischievous grin spreading across my face as I saw her curtains twitch. The second step involved gardening. I started spending more time in my yard, tending to my flowers and humming loudly, off-key show tunes. I knew Mrs. Kravitz couldn't stand loud noises, and my singing voice was definitely not something to be admired. I also made sure to wear brightly colored gardening gloves that clashed horribly with my outfit just to add an extra layer of visual offense. I even considered planting a rogue sunflower in my front yard, knowing it would violate the HOA's strict rules about approved plant species. It was all incredibly petty, I knew, but it felt good to finally take some kind of action. I was no longer a victim. I was a suburban rebel armed with a slightly misaligned car and a questionable singing voice. It was only a matter of time before Mrs. Kravitz snapped. And I was ready. It took less than a week for Mrs. Kravitz to crack. I was in my garden, belting out a particularly off-key rendition of Memory from Cats, when I heard her voice. "Sarah," she called, her voice tight with barely suppressed rage. "Can I have a word with you?" I turned around, feigning innocence. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Kravitz. Lovely day for gardening, isn't it?" She marched over to me, her face flushed. "That's exactly what I want to talk about. Your gardening. And your parking. Is there a problem?" I asked, batting my eyelashes innocently. "Yes, there's a problem," she exclaimed. "You're parking over the line. Again. And your singing is atrocious. It's disturbing the peace." I shrugged. "I'm just enjoying my property, Mrs. Kravitz. I have a right to park my car where I want as long as I'm not blocking anyone. And I have a right to sing in my own garden. But it's so loud. And so awful," she sputtered. "Well," I said, smiling sweetly, "I'm sorry you don't enjoy my singing, but I'm not going to stop. I have a right to live peacefully in my own home, just like you do." I stood my ground, refusing to back down. It was time for Mrs. Kravitz to learn that I wasn't going to be bullied anymore. I was here to stay, and I was going to make my presence known, one off-key note and slightly misaligned car at a time. "But those roses," Mrs. Kravitz said, her voice softening slightly, her gaze drifting towards my rose bushes. "They're magnificent. What kind are they?" I blinked, surprised by the sudden change in topic. "They're David Austin roses," I said, a little cautiously. "I just planted them this spring." "David Austin," she repeated, a hint of wistfulness in her voice. "I used to have a whole garden full of them. Before my arthritis got so bad." A strange silence fell between us. For a moment, the animosity seemed to fade away, replaced by something almost shared. "They're beautiful," she said softly, reaching out to touch one of the blooms. "You have a real green thumb." "Thanks," I said, feeling a flicker of something akin to sympathy. Then she sighed. "My granddaughter loves roses. She's turning 5 next month. We're having a little tea party in the garden." "That sounds lovely," I said, genuinely meaning it. It was a bizarre moment, a brief glimpse behind the Karen facade. For a fleeting second, we were just two women talking about flowers and grandchildren, finding a tiny patch of common ground in the middle of our suburban battlefield. But the moment passed quickly. The animosity soon returned. "Look," I said, breaking the silence. I don't want to fight with you, Mrs. Kravitz. I just want to live peacefully in my own home. And I'm sure you want the same thing. She sighed. I suppose you're right, she said, her voice a little less sharp. Maybe we can try to be a little more considerate of each other. That sounds good, I said, cautiously optimistic. We agreed to an uneasy truce. I promised to try to keep my singing to a reasonable volume, and she promised to stop nitpicking my parking. We wouldn't be friends, not by a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, we could coexist. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The underlying tension was still there, simmering beneath the surface. I could still feel her watchful eyes on me whenever I was outside, and I knew she was probably still complaining about me to the other neighbors. But for now, at least, the war was over. We had reached a fragile peace, a delicate balance of mutual tolerance. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than constant conflict. And who knows, maybe one day we could even become civil. But I wasn't holding my breath. The HOA, after all, was still watching. Looking back on the whole grocery incident, I realize it taught me a few valuable lessons. First, living in an HOA is not for the faint of heart. The rules, the regulations, the constant pressure to conform, it can be suffocating. Second, it's important to stand up for yourself, even when it's scary. Mrs. Kravitz tried to intimidate me, to bully me into submission, but I refused to let her. I asserted my right to live peacefully in my own home, and that's something I'll never regret. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned is the value of seeking common ground. Even with someone as difficult as Mrs. Kravitz, there was a glimmer of connection, a shared love of roses, a shared concern for our grandchildren. It's easy to focus on our differences, to demonize those who disagree with us, but sometimes, if we look hard enough, we can find something that unites us. And finally, avocados are surprisingly useful in proving your innocence. Who knew? So, what's the moral of the story? Stand up for yourself, find common ground, and always inspect your avocados for distinctive scars. You never know when it might come in handy. Life in the HOA is still interesting. I still get the occasional sideways glance from Mrs. Kravitz, and I'm pretty sure she's still reporting my minor infractions to the HOA. But I've learned to live with it. I've even started to find a certain amusement in the whole thing. It's like living in a bizarre social experiment where everyone is trying a little too hard to be perfect, and the smallest deviation from the norm is met with suspicion and judgment. But beneath the surface, there's also a sense of community, a shared desire for safety and belonging. And who knows, maybe one day Mrs. Kravitz and I will even become friends. Maybe we'll bond over our love of roses, or maybe we'll team up to fight against some even more ridiculous HOA rule. Stranger things have happened. Until then, I'll keep singing my off-key show tunes, parking slightly over the line, and inspecting my avocados for distinctive scars. Because in the world of HOAs, you never know what might happen next. But hey, at least it's never boring. And maybe, just maybe, things will get better. Or at least, a little less crazy. One can hope, right?